One question that comes up time and time again when talking about habits is, how do you stay consistent? Or, similarly, how do you stay motivated? It's one thing to start a new habit. It's another thing to follow through with that habit. And so I think this question of consistency and motivation often go together because motivation is usually seen as like one of the ways to help maintain consistency. So let's start with motivation. And we need to start here before we get to consistency for some important reasons. And motivation is inconsistent and it's also a finite resource. You can't rely on motivation to complete a long-term project. Motivation can be how you get started or why you get started, but it's not going to be the thing that propels you through the whole project or the whole habit. If you've tried to change habits before, then you already know this because you can get this huge burst of energy right at the beginning because you're super motivated. But then as your motivation wanes, your desire to complete the project doesn't feel the same, and also your ability to complete the project doesn't feel the same either. So often that's when our habits slowly kind of trickle out. Often when we rely on motivation, we stick with something for a few days, and then when the motivation wanes, that's when we get thrown off course. You can artificially create motivation, and we can talk about that at a later date. But even when you do that, that is not really a strategy that can be used every day. It's kind of more of like a once in a while thing. For now, when it comes to motivation, there's two real sides to consider. Things that motivate us, that inspire us, that propel us to take action, and then things that demotivate us, things that really detract from what we're trying to do. Seeing a debt statement as an example can be a real motivator. Perhaps you've been slacking off on your budget, you see your statement, and it can encourage you to really tighten in the reins, maybe revisit your budget. And next time you're out and you feel like impulse shopping or you have that FOMO, it can make saying no easier. It's a really clear motivation. On the flip side, seeing Instagram ads can really demotivate you. So there are two questions to consider specifically with motivation when trying to think about how it impacts you. The first is what encourages you or inspires you to stick to your goals or desired habits. And number two, what discourages you or demotivates you to stick to your goals or desired habits. Now, the rest of the video, we're going to talk explicitly about consistency. And the connection between motivation and consistency, I hope, is clear by this point. Motivation is not going to lead to consistency. There is a role for motivation in your life and in your goals, but it's not going to be how you accomplish your goals or what you want for yourself. So I think the question really is, well, all right, if motivation isn't going to help bring consistency, what can we do to be consistent? I have some tips for you. And tip number one is the size of your bite. Let me give you a classic example. You wake up one day. Maybe it's January 1st, and you decide that, you know what, this year I'm going to drink 8 glasses of water a day. I'm also going to read and or journal for 30 minutes every morning. I'm going to meal prep every week. I'm going to exercise 3 days a week. I'm also going to drink water before my coffee, etc., etc., etc. By, I don't know, day 7, you're doing like half of those habits. And then by day 30, you might have like 1 or 2 out of a list of 15 that you stick with, if you stick with any. This is the classic case of taking a bite that is too big, trying to do too much at once, and also trying to overhaul your life like overnight. Massive changes don't tend to stick because they're not a reflection of who we are right now. They're not meeting us where we are right now. They're basically, these large changes are looking at where we want to be, acting like that person, and assuming that who we are right now can just take those things on. So the way to be consistent is to have these slower changes that build up over time. In my opinion, the no buy can be a large bite, taking on a really large, really substantial change that you might not be ready to handle. Sure, there are people who successfully complete no buy years. That happens. For many folks, that change is just so drastic. And one of the reasons why it's drastic is you're not meeting yourself where you're at with the skills and behaviors and habits that you currently have. You're much better off making smaller, more incremental changes where you can make a change, adjust, iterate, make another change, adjust, iterate, keep going. Slow incremental changes allow you to learn and allow you to use that knowledge to inform further choices. Small habits are more successful because they are easier to integrate into your life. Tip number 2 is a really big one. It's kind of like the crux of this video, and it's really, do you know what habits and behaviors you actually should be working on? Do you know what they are? One of the things that happens with habits is that we can assume that we know what we're supposed to be doing or what habits are going to work because we see other people doing that thing. I've talked about this several times over the past nearly 4 years now, that one of the reasons why I went on a no buy in order to change my shopping habits was because that was the only solution that I saw at the time. If I sat down and brainstormed, okay, if I want to be at X place, if I want to achieve X goal, what are some habits or behaviors that I can implement in order to get there? I don't think a no buy would have been on that list. And if it were, it would have been closer to the bottom than to the top. Author of Tiny Habits, BJ Fogg, has an exercise to determine this exact thing, where you can figure out what are the best habits to help you achieve your goals. Here's how it works. Step number 1 is to get clear on your goals. So your goal isn't to change your shopping habits. It's also not to complete a no buy. You want to do those things to achieve something in specific. What is that more specific thing? Is it so you can save up for a house? Is it so that you can save more money? Is it so that you can live a happier life? You need to figure out what that actual end goal is so you can tailor your behaviors for your end goal. Once you have this clear goal in mind, step 2 is to brainstorm behaviors. So we're going to ask yourself this one very specific question. If you could wave a magic wand that could get you to do any behavior that would help you achieve your goal, what would it be? You're going to write down any behavior or habit that you can think of that would apply to this question. You can also ask follow-up questions like, what behaviors would you do one time? What new habits could you create? And what habits would you stop? Step 3 is to find your high impact behaviors. These are the things that are going to have the biggest step forward in an individual action. This is based on the Pareto principle, which you've probably heard, like 20% of the stuff creates 80% of the action or 80% of the results. It's like that. So you want to find the individual habits that will have the biggest impact on achieving your goal. And he has 3 questions that you need to ask for each of the behaviors that you're considering. Here are the questions. So question number 1, how effective is this habit in helping me realize my goal? So let's say one of the habits that you are considering is leaving your phone outside of your bedroom. No phones in the bedroom, no scrolling in bed. This is a habit that you're saying, you know what? I do majority of my impulse shopping when I'm lying in bed. If I don't have my phone in my bed, then I won't be impulse shopping. So would this habit be effective in helping you realize your goals? Probably. It'd probably be high up there if you shopped all the time in bed. If you didn't really shop all the time in bed, let's say you shop mostly on your way home, let's say on the train, it's not really going to do much. So I think perhaps ranking your habits in terms of effectiveness would be a really great place to start. Question number 2 is about motivation. Can I get myself to do this every day? And or do I want to do this every day? If it's not an everyday habit, then let's say like once a week or however often that it is implemented. Could I get myself to leave my phone out of my bedroom every day? And like, would I actually be invested in doing that? Would I be motivated to do that? And then number 3, can you do this behavior? Or how feasible and practical is this behavior? So if you only owned a phone, it would not be feasible for you to leave your phone outside of your bedroom because it's also your alarm clock. However, buying a separate alarm clock would be an easy fix for that. But would you be willing to buy an alarm clock? So let's say you brainstorm 15 behaviors. Anything that ranks high, I would say probably like above an 8, would be what he dubs golden behaviors. These are the things that are going to be the priority behaviors, but things that are likely to give you the biggest change. So let's say out of the 15, you have 5 that are like above an 8 out of 10. Then you would start with the easiest of the things to implement. Part of this incremental change is to build confidence and consistency. You're taking those smaller bites and then use these to go to bigger and bigger changes. This activity is honestly really stellar and I think can help you get around those assumptions of what you believe might work, because those assumptions are often guesswork, and like, have you actually thought through what might be the best route forward? And once you have all of these habits, you can then you're strategic about, okay, out of all of these things, this is the easiest to implement. I'll start there and then work my way up. Even if, let's say, no buy is part of your strategy, there will likely be habits that would come before it that would help lead up to the no buy. Tip number 3 is to integrate your habit into your routine. Integrating your habit into your routine is part of that feasibility and part of what will make a habit stick. You can't build a habit unless you can seamlessly integrate into how you operate in your life. That's also one of the reasons why big, large habits don't work, is because you haven't integrated these things into your life and they're so different than who you are now. It's difficult to do that. Let's say every morning you want to read for 30 minutes and you want to read a book that has something to do with like overconsumption or related topic to kind of help keep your mind in this frame of mind and kind of keep your goals front and center. If you don't know what books to read, or let's say you don't live by a library, or you don't have 30 minutes in the morning, or you don't like to read, you're not integrating that into your life. I bring this up because one of the traps we can fall into is shooting our way into habits. I should read, so I'm going to read. Dude, if you don't like to read, don't read. There's other things you can do. Your habit's not going to stick, and ultimately, you cannot should yourself into habit change. Tip number 4 is to integrate a dopamine hit. We typically get a little bit of a dopamine hit when we, do a little check off of a to-do list, or like when we accomplish a really big habit. When it comes to even like the checkbox, it's a little bit of a reward. It's like a really micro reward, but it's still a reward. So it gives us a little dopamine hit. Rewards are part of the habit loop, and it's one of the things that can provide a little motivation. And there are different kinds of rewards. There are really micro level rewards, like checking off a to-do list, or let's say you have a habit tracker, seeing that consistency in a habit tracker. But then there are more macro level rewards that could be stuff, but also could be other things. Recently, after I finished my website, I gave myself like 3 days to read. I was just like, it was part of how I was seeing the finish line. Once I launch this thing, then I can read for freaking days. And it drove me to the end. There are things like that we can set up for ourselves that aren't inherently stuff. Maybe after you achieve this goal, you can open a new lip gloss that's been hanging out, or maybe you get to read for a weekend. I'm sure there's other things that you can come up with. And when it comes specifically to like tracking, when you check off all of those boxes, not breaking the chain can be super satisfying. That could be like a thing that you like really strive for. It's just, I'm not going to break the chain. Maybe you have like an app where you can view 365 days and then you can see all of the check marks of all the days that you didn't spend money or all the days that you completed a habit. One way we can also integrate the dopamine hit into our lives is by taking a habit that would normally not have an action associated with it and then create a physical, tangible action that is associated with it. Let's say your goal is to not buy a coffee every day. There's no real, like, you don't see anything from that, right? Like, you don't do anything. So if you create an action associated with that, let's say every day you deposit $4 into your checking account or your savings account, sorry. You now created an action with something that typically wouldn't, and that can give you a dopamine hit. Seeing that number rise of all the days you didn't buy coffee, and now at the end of the week, you have, let's say you buy 5 coffees a week at what? We'll call them $5 just to be really easy on the math. That's $25 by the end of the week and $100 by the end of the month. Even with the leaving your phone outside of your bedroom thing, the checking it off your habit tracker is a way to create an action associated with it. Next up is milestones. I strongly encourage you to create as many milestones as you can with your habits. Perhaps it's saving a certain amount of money. You know, your milestone doesn't have to be saving $10,000. You could have milestones, let's say $500 or $100. Create as many as you want. 100, 500, 1,000. Give yourself as many reasons to celebrate as you can. That's one of the, I think, downsides about going after a really large habit change is that we can focus on how far we have to go. I'm not there yet, instead of seeing how far that you've already come. There really are so many milestones that we can create for ourselves. You might think, oh, it's easy to have milestones on a no-buy because you can just track how many days you've been on a no-buy. But there's so many other things that we can track, which includes how much money maybe we've saved up, how much debt we've paid down, or maybe if you want to leave your phone out of your bedroom, maybe you can have it for 7 days as a milestone, 30 days as a milestone. And even if you are on a no-buy, I still encourage you to create milestones that aren't just tracking the number of days, because that can create this hyperfixation on I'm perfect or I'm a failure. And then also it can also just have this mentality of the only thing that matters is completing these days. And that becomes the focus, opposed to like literally learning everything else. The last thing I want to talk about is the bounce back. Slip ups are inevitable. They are a part of basically any habit change ever. Maybe you miss a day, maybe you miss a week, maybe you spent money when you weren't supposed to. Maybe your debt payment wasn't as big as you anticipated. And the most significant hurdle in habit change is the slip up. We often let the slip up lead to the downward spiral. I'm not saying you as a person, but in letting that spiral kind of lead the way to having that habit kind of flatline. But also, when it comes to slip ups, there can be a lot of negative self-talk and a lot of just like negativity that occurs with, we can feel like we are the failure and that these slip ups or these failures are indicative of us. Like we as a person, there's something wrong with us or something wrong with me. Failure and slip ups are our best teacher. We learn the most through them. You might need to do some mindset work here and or reflection on your feelings, because how we react can run the gamut. Sometimes we have like a lot of shame associated with failure. Maybe we have a lot of like ingrained beliefs about ourselves, narratives that we tell ourselves about maybe like our worth or what we're capable of, that really need to be dissected and considered to move on. And then also getting into the practice of bouncing back after a failure is something, or a slip up is something that is going to take practice, and something that you might need to consider, like, how have you reacted historically in the past? What has prevented you from getting back up in the past? Next time you have a slip up, this is an opportunity to really consider, like, what am I feeling right now? How has this affected me? What are you thinking about yourself in this situation? One of the keys to habit change is to make the desired action as easy as possible. I've talked about this a lot. And when it comes to slip ups, one of the questions you can ask yourself is, how do I make bouncing back as easy to do as possible? Or how can I make getting back on track as easy to do as possible? This is part of why I don't think no-buys should be a step one behavior. It's because no-buys encourage this black and white line of thinking. I buy one thing, I've failed. I've spoken to hundreds, if not thousands, of people over my almost 4 years on YouTube, and I have heard this countless times that no-buys, slipping up on a no-buy, has led to spiral spending and or like negative thoughts and negative self-talk about oneself. You may not be in a place to handle that bounce back, or to handle things, or to handle yourself or your mental space if you slip up. That is okay. And therefore, starting with a different habit is probably a better choice, and one that can lead to greater success. Maybe you can try a no-buy at a later point, but perhaps it's not a day one activity. That's it for me today. Thank you so much for watching and tuning in to another day Vlogmas. I really hope that this video gave you something to consider in terms of consistency. And I would really love to hear your consistency tips in the comments as well. I'd love to see you back here again soon.